Welcome to the Erica Shady channel, bilingual, English and Spanish and English. We're continuing with Eminem, and I want to show this part that I already seen this video. Esto es para compartir. This is to share. Nothing is a reaction here. Nada de acción. And what I want to know, this guy here, I guess it's his channel, Daniel Wall, I guess that's him, right? He's interviewing the guy who actually asked Eminem for the CD. And according to the guy who actually asked Eminem for the CD, not the guy who worked or did, I guess he didn't work. What did he do? He did a internship. Not the guy who did an internship on Interscope, was it the one? Or yeah, Interscope was the one. It wasn't him. It was this guy. He was friend with that guy. But through all this time, they gave credit to the other guy. And guess what? Nobody knows the name anyway, because I don't know it. You know the name? Let's find out.
Is it true that you discovered Eminem? Is that true?
Yeah. We're going to tell the story because I don't really ever get to tell the story.
Please do.
The real story. Okay. So in a progression from there, so 94, I start interning, July 94, I start interning at Interscope, right? In February of 95, after taking an English final.
Okay, so he was also doing an internship, but there was another guy. He'll talk about it later on. Okay, so it was the guy working at Interscope. It was the guy doing an internship. He was the one doing an internship
School
then.
On some sort of psychedelic. I was sent away to a wilderness program in Montana.
Okay.
For a month, where I hiked in the snow with like a counselor and like wrote in a journal. And then from there, I was sent to Oregon, to Bend, Oregon, where I lived in an independent living program with mostly a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds, like in a house, like doing like chores and like learning how to like be like a member of society. And then eventually you move out and like you get a job and you have like a roommate who's also part of the program, and it's all, you're sober, and it's like, you're kind of like learning how to like, it's a bunch of kids who could afford a program like that, who just needed to get their shit together. And not everybody there had drug problems. Some people were there for like, they just couldn't be a part of society in some way, OCD, or maybe some of them were like other addicts, not just drugs, sex or something, eating. I don't know, whatever it was. I don't know what everybody's issues were. I don't remember. But like, we all kind of came together and like grew up together. Okay. And while I was there, this guy who I was interning for at Interscope, Stephen Levy, who was Tom Wally's like right hand, would send me like demos, like Tupac Hat, like things like that. Keep me like, stay up there, man. Like, here's the new album we released and stuff like that. So, and at the same time, I was writing my rap demo, which was largely about sobriety.
Okay.
You could see why I didn't get signed. Not a huge market for like a white Jewish kid from Beverly Hills rapping about sobriety. But hey, had to give it a shot. But when I came back from Oregon after being away for about 15 months.
But what's interesting is that Eminem was not getting signed and they were giving him a hard time because all he talked about was drugs. Here you are talking about drugs and homosexual, about pills and homosexual. Yes, they talked about alcohol and rap, and they talk about weed, but they didn't talk about hardcore drugs. And if they did, it was always like, cocaine, stay away from it, talking about all the bad things that cocaine and crack used to do. Again, so it's ironic that Eminem was the opposite. They didn't want to sign him because all he talked about was drug addiction.
I started interning again at Interscope, and I started shopping my demo. I went in the studio and I cut it, and I started shopping my demo, trying to get myself a deal. That didn't happen, obviously. And I decided to really just commit to working in the business side. I thought, maybe I'm not supposed to be a creative. I'll follow my dad's footsteps and be on the business side. And when I did that, about the same time, they offered me a job in the mailroom at Interscope. And that was the summer of 96. I started working in the mailroom at Interscope, and it was, 96 Interscope. The 90s at Interscope is like the 70s at Casablanca, right? Like the 90s at Interscope is like legendary. We're talking like, they had 1 week when like the top 4 albums on the Billboard 200 were Interscope albums, right? Wow. It was Bush and No Doubt, and then Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar, and Kirk Franklin, God's Property. Like, the fact that Jimmy could have...
That's crazy.
Antichrist Superstar and God's Property out at the exact same time, charting in the top 4 on Billboard, is just speaks to the genius of Jimmy and Interscope. I mean, it's just mind blowing. I mean, I was there for such a magical time watching artists break left and right. And in the mailroom was like, I was getting paid like $18,000 a year. That was my salary.
Wow.
It was nuts. But you know what? I knew that if I wanted to be an A&R, which is what I wanted to be, you had to act as if. That was a lesson I learned from my mom early on, is like act as if. So I did a few things.
As if you were an A&R.
Yeah.
And that's what they tell you too about sobriety. Act as if you're a person who doesn't need to use drugs. Act as if you're a person who doesn't need alcohol. Act as if you're a person who doesn't like to go to the bars until you become that person. So it's quite spread. Eso de que actúa hasta que te conviertes es un proverbio, es una enseñanza que ha estado por mucho tiempo y no solamente se aplica en los negocios o en quererse avanzar, sino también en querer ser un tipo de persona, por ejemplo, ser más amable o ser más amigable o lo que sea.
I found out where everybody was going to go, what all the shows were, and I made sure I was there. I stood next to the A&R people. I looked at the bands, just would give my opinion if I was asked, I took, you know what a buck slip is?
No.
I feel old saying it. A buck slip is like this long rectangular card that people used to like write notes on when they'd send a CD or something, and then they'd write like a note like, "Hey man, here's the new CD. Enjoy, Evan." And it would have like an address and like your name at the bottom and stuff like that, and they would attach it to the CD or cassette. And they'd mail it out. So I took these buck slips, these Interscope buck slips, and they were the same. Bottom of it was the same size as business cards, and I took them to the mailroom to one of those huge giant knife cutter things. And I lined them up with business cards, and I made my own business cards out of the bottom of buck slips. And it had like the general number for Interscope on the front of it. And so I wrote my cell phone number on the back, right? And so at Interscope at the time, if you called the mailroom from an external line and you called from an internal line, it was 2 different voicemails, right? So if you called me from an internal line, I'd be like, "Hey, what's up? It's the mailroom. Leave a message. We'll get back to you." But if you called from an external line, it was, "Hey, you reached Evan Bogart at Interscope Records. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." So I would go out and I'd check out bands and I'd hand them my business card and I'd say, "I do A&R at Interscope. Hit me up." And they would call and they'd leave a message. They would get the external voicemail, so it sounded like it was a real office. So you just have to like act as if, right? And eventually, Tom was working on a Tupac album after Tupac had died. They decided to put out a posthumous Tupac album. And from my time had working with them before, they knew I was a huge hip hop fan. They knew I was a huge Tupac fan, and they really didn't have anybody else in the building who knew hip hop. So they promoted me out of the mailroom to kind of be like an A&R floater, is what they called it. Like, I didn't really have I was just like working in the A&R department.
Okay.
And I was working on this album, and they were like, "We're going to teach you how to make an album," And I remember Tom said something to me, which always stuck with me, which is like, he said, "We're going to teach you how to make an album. I'm going to teach you how to finish an album," which is the hardest thing to do. People don't know how to finish albums. And I thought it was interesting because people really don't sometimes, they just keep going on and on and on. It's like, how do you know when an album is done kind of thing, which I thought was an interesting lesson. But it set me off on this like 6-month journey of like going in the studio. They had this vault with like every unreleased Tupac song in 2-inch reels with Jimmy, Interscope's head engineer, this guy Chuck Reed, and we pulled up every Tupac song that had ever been recorded. They had all of them, and we did like board mixes on all of them, analog days, and we'd mix them down and put them on DATs, and then we'd separate them into like A, B, or C songs based on what we thought they were. A quality, B quality, or C quality, and I'd have to transcribe lyrics for all the songs, like 160 songs. And so,
and A, B quality is the front side and the back side, which a lot of times the back side of the not the CD, the LP, but the B side of anything. Usually they had good songs. Don't get me wrong. They did have good songs. A lot of times they'll put those songs there thinking that song was not going to be good, and that was the hit song.
And they were like crazy like doodles on like the track sheet. I should have taken them. I was too honest. But like Tupac's drawing on there. He had like one where it was like a gravestone that said R.I.P. B.I.G. on it. Like crazy shit.
Wow.
Like it's so nuts. Anyway, so I'm working on this project, and I get and we go to the studio to start working on it. A studio called Sound Castle, which is now Pulse Studios.
Wow.
So before it was Pulse, it was a studio. It was a studio you could rent called Sound Castle, like a record plant or one of those, you know, one of those kind of things. So it was Sound Castle. Sound Castle was locked out for this Tupac project, and they had like armed guards there, and there was like rumors of like Death Row is going to try to steal the reels, and like, you know. So every day I would go there. I'm like this 18-year-old kid working on a Tupac album with like his mom and like the Outlaws, like Edie and those guys, and like Mopreem, his brother, and like all this whole crew of people at Sound Castle, and everybody's like smoking weed and telling stories, and like you have these like legendary producers like Tony D and Easy Mo B and Soul Shock and Carlin, and all these people coming in and working on all these songs. And they had a couple hit songs on that album, which was "Do for Love," which was a big hit, and "I Wonder If Heaven Got a Ghetto," which was also a single on that album. And you know, the album went like 3 times platinum. It was, you know, a big record. It was his first posthumous Tupac album. But I heard, you know, I spent a lot of time and I heard a lot of amazing stories of Pac, and it was like a really, really incredible.
Interesting, because Eminem in the song, what was it? Sing for the Moment? I don't remember what song, but I know there's a song that he says that he's upset that they murdered Tupac and Biggie, and that these people are making money off of it. When Interscope, Dr. Dre, Arvin, the one that got him in, were making money posthumously after the death. Después de la muerte, postúmelo, lo tenían, hicieron dinero. Wow. Y él le cantó esa canción diciendo, hey, ¿me entiendes? Estoy harto de que esta gente estén haciendo dinero de Biggie y de Tupac. Interscope estaba haciendo dinero de Tupac.
Experience for my first album that I ever got to make. But while I was working on the record, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, a DJ named Cassidy, DJ Cassidy Hoban, not DJ Cassidy the rapper, but Cassidy Hoban, who I had grown up with. And he said, "What are you doing right now?" I said, "I'm working on this album." And he was like, "You got to leave right now. You got to come right now to this place." And I was like, "What is it?" And he's like, "I'm DJing this freestyle battle in Inglewood at the Proud Bird on Century Boulevard. You have to come down here and you have to see this kid." And so I was like, "Oh man, I'm going to get like fired. I'm supposed to like not take my eyes off the reels." Like it was like some, like I was in charge of making sure that these 2-inch reels did not go missing. I mean, to the point that like I would meet the head of business affairs in like the vault of the bank building Interscope was at. And like they would like switch out the reels every day. Like there was like a lot of security around it. And it was like, I was told like drive from Westwood to Silver Lake, but don't take any main streets. Like, you know, like it was a lot of security, right, around this thing. And as an 18-year-old kid, you're like, this is the coolest thing ever, right? Sure. You know, like Death Row's chasing me, you know, whatever. But I played hooky. I left because Cassidy was like dead serious. And I went down to this freestyle contest in Inglewood, and I walked in and I proceeded to watch Eminem in this freestyle battle, you know, 8 Mile-esque, right? Like the movie, right?
Yeah.
And it was the Rap Sheet Rap Olympics. And he was competing in it. And I called my friend who I was in a rap group with, this kid Aristotle, to come down there. I was like, "Yo, you got to come down here and see this shit." And then I called my other best friend, who I had just hired to replace me in the mailroom when I got promoted to A&R Floater, this kid, Dean Geislinger.
And I think this is the kid who said that it was his, that he was the one who asked Eminem for the CD. Ese amigo de él, imagínate cómo es la gente, qué traición, eh? What a betrayal. Everybody that is famous and makes money doesn't do that, but most people do. Todo el mundo que tiene dinero y es famoso, no es que todos lo hagan, pero la mayoría, hay mucha gente que se roba la idea de otra persona. They steal the ideas from other people.
Basically kind of like half living with his sister, half living at my house, and like called my mom and like was part of my family. And I say that because I'll get to the point of that in a second.
Okay.
But he was my best friend. And these were my 2 best friends. And I called them to come down there to the freestyle contest. And they showed up a couple hours later. And it was like the semifinals. And M was like, you know, saying crazy things like, "Don't make my facial tissue a racial issue." Like all this like crazy shit that was like mind blowing. And so I went up to, he had lost. He lost in the finals. He went up against this rapper named Otherwise from like a local rap group called Project Blowed. And he's first round, he came out and he did this, like, they played this KRS-One song that was like still number one. You know the song Still Number One? I don't know, you may not know. But anyway, he did this like kind of shout out like verse. Like it was kind of like it wasn't really, like it was like a weird thing to pull in the finals of a freestyle battle. But anyway, he ended up losing in the finals, and he probably would have lost anyway because it was like hometown crowd, Inglewood, right? And for a few reasons. Rap Sheet was the first the only black-owned rap magazine at the time, right? And he was a white rapper, which was kind of like not a thing at that moment. White guys rapping, right? You know, coming off of like the Vanilla Ice, Marky Mark years, right? And one of the other judges was a rapper named Juice, who was like kind of Eminem's rival in all these freestyle contests, these battle contests. And the winner of the contest then goes and battles the winner of last year, who was Juice. So Juice didn't want to see M because they had just gone to like triple overtime at Scribble Jam in Chicago, like recently, right before that, right? So he didn't want to see M because he didn't want to be staged up by M. He knew M could beat him, right? And so for a myriad of reasons, and then M kind of throwing the first round of this finals, which was weird, he lost. And then M was pacing backstage, kind of like muttering on his breath, kind of like angry, teared up a little bit. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, I work at Interscope. I do A&R. Floater, but whatever.
You're an A&R.
A&R. And he introduced me to his manager at the time, a guy named Mark Kempf. It wasn't Paul. Paul was there too, but Paul was M's lawyer. Like,
oh wow,
he wasn't his manager, and I'd just become his lawyer as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Paul's a lawyer. Oh my God, Paul un abogado. What do you mean that you were his lawyer to? What is it? You can be a lawyer in the record company without having a law degree. Tú puedes hacerte un abogado en las compañías, en las disqueras, sin tener un degree. Yo no sabía
finals,
eso.
which was weird. He lost. And then M was pacing backstage, kind of like muttering on his breath, kind of like angry, teared up a little bit. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, I work at Interscope. I do A&R. Floater, but whatever.
You're an A&R.
A&R. And he introduced me to his manager at the time, a guy named Mark Kempf. It wasn't Paul. Paul was there too, but Paul was M's lawyer. Like,
oh wow,
he wasn't his manager. And I'd just become his lawyer as well. And so I went up to M and Mark Kempf. Mark Kempf gave me this sampler cassette, Slim Shady EP sampler cassette.
That's crazy.
And I drove home with Aristotle and Dean in the car, and it popped the cassette into my car. And we just like literally drove home with our fucking jaws on the ground. Like, I had never heard anything like it in my whole life. And so I proceeded to immediately make copies of that for the people at Interscope, and, you know, was either over the next 5 months, basically largely ignored or ridiculed for it.
Wait, people didn't get it?
Every A&R passed at
Really?
Interscope. Every A&R passed at Interscope.
Damn.
Every A&R passed at Interscope. And like, I would get more. They sent me the Infinite album. I made new CDs. They sent me other unreleased stuff. I'd get phone calls from them. He was like unsigned hype in the Source. I wallpapered the A&R department. I put up his unsigned hype everywhere. I was like, you guys, this is crazy. Like, this kid is going to blow up. In the meantime, there was like rumors that Loud Records was interested in him. Like, you know, and then I got a phone call. Basically that they were like, M's coming into town. Can you get him a meeting at Interscope? Said, I'll see what I can do. He said, you should come hang, whatever. We're going to be at the radio station, listen to us at the radio. You know, we'll be on Power 106 on Friday night. And then we're going up to the Wake Up Show on Saturday night. So I went to Tom Wally's office and I tried to get them to take a meeting. And I was basically told no.
Oh, man.
Wow.
And so in a last ditch effort, I took the cassette.
If you find me that I'm surprised as he's talking, it's because I only watched it one time and it was fast. I didn't really pay too much attention to it because I was planning to share it. So I missed a couple of things, and that's why I'm like going like, oh wow, it seems like I'm reacting because I'm literally reacting. I didn't pay attention to that part. No le presté atención a esa parte. So por eso que yo estoy como, oh wow, esto y aquello. Porque hay cosas que yo lo único que capté es que el amigo de él le robó la idea. The only thing I captured was that his friend stole his idea. His friend claimed that it was his. That's the only thing I captured.
And I went over to Jimmy's office. Now, the thing is, Jimmy and Tom weren't like, super tight.
Okay.
There was kind of, and I didn't know at the time. I literally had no idea at the time. I was too young to understand this. But in retrospect, I was told that there was kind of like a little bit of like a battle. Like there was Tom and Jimmy had a little bit of a power struggle. And like you were either Tom's guy or you were Jimmy's guy. And so I was one of Tom's guys. So, but I went over to Jimmy's office. And when I walked in there, my best friend, Dean, was sitting at the assistant's desk because Jimmy's first assistant, a guy named Evan Strauss, was on his honeymoon. And so Jimmy's second assistant, a guy named Scott Igo, was sitting in as the first assistant. So for the second assistant, they pulled a kid out of the mailroom. And so my best friend, who had been pulled out of the mailroom to temp on Jimmy's assistant desk. And I was like, yo, Dean, put this tape in Jimmy's bag. And he's like, no, I'm going to get in trouble. And I was like, dude, come on, just do it. If anybody says anything, you say it was me. Just put it in his bag. And Jimmy had a cassette tape. He had like a satchel that he would take home every weekend. And A&R guys would come in there and they'd drop cassette demo tapes in there they wanted Jimmy to listen to. And they'd put it in there and they'd take it home and he'd listen to it whenever he would listen to it. I don't know when he would listen to it, but when he would listen to them. And so I basically forced the tape into the bag. And I told Dean, if they say anything, you can blame it on me. Right? I mean, it was kind of like a last-ditch effort at this point. Because I knew if this didn't happen, Eminem was going to sign with Loud Records. I knew it. Okay? Friday night comes, M's up at Power 106, even on the radio at Power 106, because I recorded it. They're like, you know, Steve Rifkin, if you're listening, Eminem, Loud Records. Like, you know, like there was no thought about Interscope whatsoever. Right? Damn. Saturday morning, I get a page on my pager. This is what year it was. 911, Dean's number. Called Dean. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, Dre and Jimmy heard the tape. Is Eminem in town? I was like, yeah, he was at Power 106 last night. We're going up to the Wake Up Show tonight. Tell him to listen. They want to set up a meeting. I was like, cool, I'll make it happen. Let me connect you. So I connected them with M's people, set up a meeting for Monday. The M came in and they struck a deal. Now, on Monday, I went to go work on the Tupac project. Dean sat in on the meeting. And the last thing I said to Dean before I hung up the phone with him on Saturday was, you told him I brought it in, right? And he said, of course I did. Dean told him he brought it in. Damn. I didn't know that for 2 weeks, till 2 weeks later when people came up to me to start telling me, you know, Dean's telling people he brought Eminem in.
Wow.
So I went to go work on the Tupac project on Monday. And Dean sits in on the meeting. Jimmy knows none the wiser because he thinks he brought it in. Eminem don't know shit because he works for Jimmy. So Dean's playing this like perfectly at this point, right? And only 2 weeks later did I start finding out, people coming up to me at the label saying, you know, Dean's telling people that he brought in Eminem. And that ended obviously me and Dean's friendship. But you know, we ended up continuing to work on this project together, but kind of it was pretty awkward. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I left Interscope and I went on my own and the Bass Brothers, who discovered Eminem, hired me to do A&R for them. So I ended up A&Ring the first Eminem album on behalf of Web Entertainment, Marky and Jeff Bass, and Dean ended up A&Ring it on behalf of Interscope. And
at least he ended up being part of it. Por lo menos él terminó siendo parte de eso, pero the music industry they're cutthroats, man. Son corta garganta y eso, que será su amigo, that was his friend, he grew up with him. You can't come and say, oh yeah, people are coming in and they're being eaten up by people who are already in the industry. Nah, these two grew up together, todos crecieron juntos. So no es como que son la gente de la industria que vinieron, esta es una persona que él conocía, this is a person that he knew. Can't trust anyone, man.
Thus began the riff of Who Brought It In, me or Dean.
Wow, because there's
a lot of people who are like Dean, and Dean, I mean, listen, honestly, Dean is I don't even care. Like Dean's like a social climbing con man who got burned out of the music industry. Like he got fired from a job at J Records years later and then never made it back in. And I think he's like a professional poker player now or something. Like, so, you know, you get what's coming to you, right? Like karma, she's real. But, I've done it again and again, you know, it's not like that. It's not like that to me, but I will say that like it did hurt. It was kind of like my first lesson in the music industry, to be stabbed in the back by your friend, you know. And years later when Dean was working at Interscope in an official capacity, I went and had lunch with him and I was sat with him and I was like, why'd you do that, man? And he was like, because I was there the night that you discovered him, and I thought that you should have said we both found him. And I said, yeah, but I invited you, and I'm the one who did all the legwork for like 6 months. And he was just like, I just think differently. I think you should have said we both brought it in. So since you didn't, I decided to take all the credit.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy. You learn. I always say everybody's got to get fucked on their way up. You know, everybody's got to get screwed on their way up.
Does this still happen a lot though? Even
Yeah, I think people always look. The best way to learn is for stuff like that to happen. You know, and you kind of learn how to like.
But okay.
Protect yourself, and you learn different ways of doing things and stuff. And
so you do learn something. There's a way to avoid it. Because I was going to say, how do you learn? What will you learn? That your best friend betray you, and then that there are people out there that are going to betray you, so that you got to keep your eyes open. That's about it. You learn to be skeptical. Eso es todo. Uno aprende a no confiar. Es todo. Y ya no te duele tanto, and it doesn't hurt you anymore. But it will still happen. Because there's no way you can avoid it. No hay manera de evitarlo. Eso es mentira. Uno puede vivir con una persona toda su vida. Y esa persona te puede quitar la vida. And that person can take your life. And you can know that person your whole life. And they can unalive you. So, there's no way to avoiding it. There's no way to escape from it. Okay, now, the only thing that you learn, like I said before, is to be skeptical. Es la única manera que uno aprende.
I think the bigger mistake that I made wasn't that I didn't protect myself. I think the bigger mistake that I made was that I didn't just keep going, keep my head down, keep my nose clean, keep my head down, and just keep working and do it again and do it again and do it again. Keep bringing artists to Interscope, like I've done since I left Interscope. You know, and it would have all shook out in the long run. Like Eminem. And now it's like to say Eminem was just another artist is crazy because Eminem changed music forever. But in the grand scheme of things, like, you know, like he could have just been another artist, you know, and I could have done it over and over again and brought more artists in and just kind of like, you know, kept quiet and did my thing. But it was hurtful, and I was 19 years old and I didn't know how to handle it. And so eventually towards the end of the 90s, I left Interscope and went to go do something else and ended up A&Ring the record from the Bash Brothers side. And
because you brought like songs to him, like you did a lot for that record, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a song As the World Turns, which is on the record, which actually the beat of that song was actually a beat on my demo.
Oh, wow.
So I was playing my demo one night and he was like, "What, are you gonna do something with that beat?" And I was like, "No, man, this is like my demo. Like, I'm not seriously trying to like." He's like, "Can I have it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll introduce you to the producer, a guy named Justin Trugman." And
That's
so
crazy.
Justin came in and they reproduced him and the Bash Brothers reproduced it, and it became As the World Turns.
Because there's one of my favorite documentaries, The Defiant Ones.
Yeah.
There's this whole scene where Jimmy talks about how an intern brought in the CD, but he never mentions the intern.
And this kid, he's like, this kid.
And I was like, it's got to be Evan.
Or it was Dean. I don't know. Who was it? I do know. I mean, obviously, look, I mean, everybody's got their own stories, but like.
You got yours.
Yeah, but the difference is mine's real. Mine's the truth. And I always say there's like one story and another story, and in the middle there's the truth. Like, this is the full-on truth. This is the full-on God's honest, swear on my dad's grave truth that Dean did not bring out Eminem.
And it's true. I mean, he didn't bring him if the guy called him, because he called that guy Dean. Beyonce. Okay, so they all pass Eminem, but what is his name? Why don't they say the name of the person? Let me see. Maybe they got the name
Everyone
here.
who hates
Why don't they have the name? I don't know this name. Is that the guy, Daniel Wall? I mean, Daniel Wall's the one interviewing.
Who else am I going to be? Everyone else is taken.
I don't know, because it doesn't look like the guy. So it must be him. It must be, the guy interviewing is Daniel Wall, which doesn't look like him. No se parece, so that must be a very old picture. Anyhow, hope you got to the end of this one. I hope that you enjoyed it like I did. I was not reacting, and then I ended up reacting. Yo no esperaba reaccionar y terminé reaccionando. Because I don't know why. But anyhow, leave a comment.